Thank you for being here today. My name is Doug Murray. I am Pennsylvania Policy Director for Business for America. I would like to welcome you today to our second webinar of 2022, PA Election Reform, Why Business Should Care. I'll first start because we're in Pennsylvania and it's Groundhog's Day, so I'll wish everyone a happy six more weeks of winter if you enjoy winter, and I guess just enjoy the gray for 6 more, or try to enjoy the gray if you can for the next 6 weeks. So I'll just start by real quickly introducing Business for America, the organization I work for. We are a nonprofit coalition of businesses, a national nonprofit of coalition of businesses advocating for good governance, for voting rights, for election reform across the country. We are active in Pennsylvania under the Back to Business Pennsylvania campaign in partnership with West Philadelphia Corridor Collaborative. I'll let my colleague Jabari real briefly touch on his organization as well.
Hey everyone, my name is Jabari Jones. I'm the president of the West Philadelphia Corridor Collaborative, and we are partnering with Business for America for the Getting Back to Business campaign. The West Philly Corridor Collaborative is West Philadelphia's largest association of small businesses, representing over 2,000 independent companies along 12 commercial corridor shopping districts.
Great, thank you, Jabari. So our organizations are partnering together in this campaign to recruit, educate businesses on the importance of voting rights, good governance, and to focus the legislature on getting back to business. We know a lot of businesses are hurting, especially recovering coming out of this pandemic. So our mission here is to get the legislator to get the state of Pennsylvania more focused on the economy instead of pursuing detrimental voting restrictions for voters, which we hear from businesses that they don't like how voting restrictions impact their workforces. We are also right now, I will send this link in the chat. We are gathering signatures for a letter. I will send that to everyone, which we are going to send to the Pennsylvania legislature. It's a very short letter, 1 page, just encouraging the legislature to focus on the economy and maybe spending some of the money that they received in the COVID dollars instead of focusing on constitutional amendments to restrict voting, things like that. So please reach out if you have any questions on that. We would welcome your signature on that. And I'll also provide my email if you have any questions. We'd like to start real quick by thanking the Heinz Endowments and the Impact Project for their support of our Back to Business Pennsylvania campaign. And also one last housekeeping item is that this webinar is being recorded. So I just wanted to give everyone an FYI on that, so we can share the link after the webinar for if you want to look at it in the future. So for this webinar, real quick, I think the case for businesses getting involved in voting rights and protecting voting rights became a little more urgent last Friday, as many of you may know. The Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court ruled that mail voting under the bipartisan 2019 Act 77 is unconstitutional. So this really, sent shockwaves through the election and voting community in Pennsylvania. We've heard, from businesses that it really is going to hurt their employees' access to the polls, their flexibilities to vote. So that's something that we definitely, I know our panelists today will speak to a bit. It's very important, very timely. We also will cover other important election reforms that businesses care about and kind of make the business case for why election reform is important in Pennsylvania. Business for America and the West Philadelphia Corridor Collaborative are hopeful that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court will overturn that ruling. So that is our position we have taken. I'll real quickly now introduce our panelists, and then we can kick off the webinar. So today we have first Jabari Jones, who already introduced himself. He is the president and my colleague working in this campaign, the Corridor Collaborative. He will focus a lot of his remarks on the business case for healthy civic life and voting rights. Next, we have Elizabeth Howard, who is Senior Counsel for Democracy at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law. She also serves on Business for America's Advisory Council. Thank you for being here. And next, we have Susan Gobreski, who is the Director of Government Policy with the Pennsylvania League of Women Voters, specifically in the Philadelphia chapter. Thank you for being here, Susan. And then last but not least, we have Ethan Demme, who is CEO of Demme Learning based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, who will provide a business owner's view of the importance of voting rights and access in Pennsylvania. So enough with the intros. I'll kick it over here to my colleague Jabari.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for taking some time out of your day today to join this webinar and learn a little bit more about that. We appreciate the interest in our campaign, and we hope that by the end of today's presentation and all of our additional panelists, there'll be definitely some nuggets of wisdom and things that you can take from this webinar. As I start the conversation about why businesses should care about this and what the business case is for democracy, I think it's important to kind of talk a little bit more about like why the collaborative is here and why we're partnering with Business for America to do this. As a business association, we deal with some of the same issues that businesses across the Commonwealth deal with when they're thinking about making stances on particularly controversial issues and controversial legislative issues. And so I know that one of the things that always comes up is businesses say, well, why do we want to get involved necessarily in something that may not directly affect us or might be controversial or the possibility of retribution from lawmakers or et cetera. And so I'll give a little bit of the background of what's been happening in my district. And I'm sure a lot of businesses, no matter which part of the state you're in, you can identify with some of these same issues. So when the pandemic hit, 92% of businesses in my district in West Philadelphia were shuttered from anywhere from 4 to 9 months. We had the average small business when those pandemic related shutdowns were lifted had $16,000 worth of past due bills, obligations, or expenses that they had not been able to cover. So there was significant debt. There were several industries, and in fact, some of those same industries are still struggling today that are on the verge of collapse when it comes to event spaces and some of our churches and religious institutions, and a number of other industries, restaurant, hospitality industries that have really struggled being able to make it through the pandemic and be able to survive and retain employees. There was over 13,000 jobs in my district alone that disappeared. And even today, only 45% of those jobs have actually returned. And so there have been a significant number of economic issues. And when we look to Harrisburg, we look to our legislature to say, well, what's the legislature doing about this? We saw, pretty much a lack of action and a lack of focus. Our legislature was spending time on making it harder for people to vote rather than focusing on some of the economic related issues that were happening in their home district. There were high unemployment, businesses collapsing, businesses were closing. Every week there was a new business or a restaurant or a staple that was a staple asset in a community that was shutting down. And each business that shuts down, not only does that mean there are employees that are obviously out of work, but it also means that that community now has to go travel a little bit further in order to buy the goods and services and products that they want to need in their daily basis. So there was a number of significant issues that we saw, and we were very upset, like many of the businesses I'm sure on this call and many of the other chambers of commerce on the call, that said, what are my legislators doing for me? This is like one of the worst crises that we have seen in our lifetime, and the legislature was not focused on economic recovery. They banked over $7 billion in relief money that was set to be doled out to help people that were struggling. They banked it and decided to postpone debates on spending that, postpone debates on some of the other larger issues that we're facing, like labor shortages, like supply chain issues, like rising gas and shipping prices, and just general uncertainty about COVID restrictions that the business community has been seeking clarity about, since the pandemic started. And then we looked at what the legislature was focusing on, and they were focusing on undemocratic measures. They were focusing on costly audits. So it's one thing for, businesses in these counties that have been struggling and they've been trying to figure out how they're going to retain employees, how they're going to stay open, how they're going to continue to serve, their respective communities. And then on the other hand, the state government is trying to ask cities and counties to spend upwards of $40 million on audits. for an election that's already been certified twice. And we feel, and from some of the colleagues that I've spoken to in some of the counties, whether they be red, blue, or purple, they have the same thing. So at the end of the day, the election's already been certified twice. The state has existing mechanisms to ensure the certification of elections. And the fact that, there's members of the legislature that are still continuously to push an audit that they know is going to cost upwards of $40 million. And that's only one county. That was only one county for $40 million. And I think there was 9 counties that they wanted to audit, while cities, counties, and government is trying to figure out how to help businesses. For them to spend $40 million on auditing an election that has already been certified, is a waste of time. And it was very angry to our businesses, to us, to the other advocates that are going to Harrisburg every day and trying to get solutions to help businesses. It was very angry. And then as you keep moving forward, there have been more and more bills that have been produced, and all sorts of sly ways that elected officials have been trying to circumvent, the regular democratic processes of our legislature. There have been constitutional amendments. There have been talks about voter IDs. There have been talks about reducing the amount of time it takes for someone to be able to register to vote before an election. There have been conversations about eliminating, mail-in ballots and ballot drop boxes, even though we as a state are still going through a pandemic. And even though we've learned the lessons that in the previous 2 elections, because of COVID-19, we suffered poll worker shortages. We had polling places that shut down. We had complete chaos throughout the district when it came to people figuring out where they could cast a ballot. And unfortunately, the legislature hasn't been there. So that's one of the reasons why we partnered here with Business for America, because we believe that, one, it's important that the legislatures get back to business, or legislators need to focus on the economic recovery of our state. People are suffering, and people are ultimately the most important thing. People over politics, people over party, people over over ideology. In many cases, we have people in the city of Philadelphia and in all sorts of counties across the Commonwealth that are still struggling, that are still figuring out how they're going to pay their bills. Businesses that are sitting there getting past due and overdue bill notices. We have, of course, labor shortages where businesses are struggling to hire. We have businesses that are struggling to get inventory because our ports have been overrun. And of course, other labor shortage related issues have affected that. So it's time we want the legislature to abandon some of those undemocratic measures that have taken so much time, energy, and taxpayer dollars to investigate, and spend those where they would be better suited helping people and figuring out the ways that are going to drive our economy forward and help us recover from one of the worst declines. And then the second principle of this campaign, which I think is very important, is that business leaders across the state agree that we want to make sure that elections are safe and accessible. We business communities rallied for one of the first times I've seen, and I know that I understand that, when it comes to political ideology, a lot of business organizations in the past and still do have been very skeptical and worried about working with some of the more progressive organizations, and because sometimes those interests haven't always come together. But one of the things that when Act 77 came forward, which was a very rare case of not only bipartisanship, but also businesses and even progressive organizations and conservative organizations working together, was around the concept of mail-in ballots, because it makes it easier for employees to vote. It allows people to vote from the comfortability and safety of their home. They still are able to make sure their votes are counted. And for businesses, it ensures that your employees are able to be civically engaged. We have businesses that provided information to their employees on how to use mail-in ballots. And for businesses, it helped them be more productive on election day, because many businesses, especially our most civically engaged companies, they had created policies that had time off of work, and people that took the day off or took time off in order to vote and sit in ballot lines. Now people could vote from the comfortability of their own home, and they were still able to go to work that day for some of those businesses that wanted to remain productive on election day. So everyone came together and supported Act 77 in a very rare case of true bipartisanship. And that's one of the reasons why we want to defend those kinds of things. We believe that elections should be accessible, that individuals should have the ability to be able to cast their ballot, that it should be secure, that you shouldn't have to worry about the government trying to subpoena your personal information and find out who you voted for and where you live and where your address is, and some of the things that unfortunately the legislature has been feeling is appropriate to propose. And so that's why we're here, and that's why I encourage all of the businesses that are on this call, that are listening. Please join our campaign. Please sign the letter. Get involved. Talk to your other fellow businesses, your neighbors, your vendors that you're doing business with, the people that businesses that might be contracting with you if you're a business-to-business type of company, and get this word out across the Commonwealth. The businesses are just fed up. We want the legislature to focus on important issues that affect us. And at the end of the day, our cries and our concerns have not been heard by this legislature, and we need them to abandon some of these undemocratic measures that ultimately are going to hurt us and our employees. So I'm going to stop there, and thanks again, Doug, for giving me the time here, and I will let our next wonderful panelist kick it off.
Thank you, Jabari. Real quick, I just wanted to, you had one remark at the end there that was very interesting. You mentioned, getting the businesses to talk to their vendors, other ways they can get involved to support this campaign. And we know that you've written some great op-eds for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Would you recommend other businesses do that with their own local publication?
Absolutely. To the extent that you as a business are able to get in touch with your local publications, and it doesn't need to be as big as the Inquirer. It could be, a town paper, it could be a county paper, it could be a community paper, but write that opinion. And the more people that circulate an opinion, the more people that are willing to take a stance on this issue, it encourages other people to also step up, other people that have the same beliefs, that are like, I do agree with this, but I don't want to be the first guy to step out there, or I don't want to be the only guy in my county to step out there and say this. But each person that does step forward, it gives a level of comfortability, and to use a political word that I know we use in a chamber world, we call it cover. It gives a little bit of cover for additional people to come forward and speak out and say, hey, you know what, we agree with this, and it's something I stand. So I encourage you, if you're able to do that on publications, even if you're able to spread your message even on social media, and call out some of these, follow some of these good government pages. And when you see statements that come out from us, from some of the other organizations that are represented on this call, and other undemocratic measures, repost that with your opinion and say, we shouldn't be focusing on this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jabari. And now we will move to Liz Howard from the Brennan Center.
Thank you so much, Doug, and thank you so much to Business for America and Jabari for hosting this wonderful webinar. I'm delighted to join everyone today. So my name is Liz Howard. I'm Senior Counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice. We are an independent, nonpartisan law and policy institute. So we work to reform, revitalize, and when necessary, such as in the current environment, defend our systems of democracy. And I have been lucky enough to do a lot of work in Pennsylvania, working closely with many of the local and state election officials. I also sit on the Secretary of the Commonwealth's post-election audit working group, which was created back in, I believe it was 2018. To look at and work with the local election officials on their current post-election audit processes. So I'm happy to talk to you today about a couple of things going on in your state. So I think we can go to the maybe third slide. Yes, as Jabari mentioned, not very long ago, Republicans and Democrats in Pennsylvania came together to pass a moderately substantive election reform bill, which is probably the most substantive election law reform that has passed in the state since around in the 1930s. So this was a very important effort, and it included some very important changes. As Jabari mentioned, right, the big piece of this was to authorize and allow all Pennsylvanians to vote by mail. Prior to the passage of Act 77, Pennsylvanians had to qualify. They also had to return their ballot by, I think it was Friday before the election. Act 77 also contained, again, some common sense, bipartisan supported reforms, such as changing the voter registration deadline to give eligible Pennsylvania voters more time to register to vote before the election. So as long as they registered 15 days before the election, they can now vote in that election. And it extended the deadlines for when the absentee ballot had to be back. So now we are at like we were in Virginia, right? So long as the ballot is received by the close of polls on election day, that is going to be counted. So this was a big important step, and I think it's important to notice that this was done prior to the pandemic, and again, you know, as we will continue to say, with bipartisan support. People on both sides of the aisle thought that these reforms were necessary and good for all Pennsylvanians, you know, and we agree. So I think, and if we go to the next slide, Jabari mentioned, you know, all of the issues that are important to you that the legislature is not having hearings about, that the legislature is not tackling. But I can tell you what they have been spending a lot of time doing. They've been spending a lot of time rehashing the 2020 election. The 2020 election is, you know, pushing a year and a half away now. The winner of that election was certified and has taken office a long time ago. The election in Pennsylvania was certified. There were not just one, but two post-election audits that were conducted in Pennsylvania. You know, all of these audits provide confirmation of the accuracy of the outcome. Yet, the Pennsylvania legislature continues to invest time and a lot of money at this juncture in these hearings about election administration and efforts to obtain information about voters in the state related to basically, you know, a sham partisan review. So if we go to the next slide, in an attempt, right, to push the sham partisan review again of the 2020 election, which is, you know, more than a year and a half ago, Senator Mastriano went and sent letters to 3 different counties in the state of Pennsylvania, asking and demanding information related to the 2020 election. Wanted information about ballots, wanted information about voting machines, and you know, a long list of items. The election officials were in York County, Tioga County, and Philadelphia. Philadelphia responded, you know, and which Senator Mastriano, I'm sure, knew on the front end that this was going to cost a lot of money for the Philadelphia election officials to put together all the information that he requested. Philadelphia estimated that responding to his request was going to cost $40 million. And I think it's important to reiterate that that the costs associated with this sham audit that Mastriano was originally pushing, and which now is shifted over more to the attempts to obtain information from the Secretary of the Commonwealth, is the personal costs to your amazing election officials in Pennsylvania. The Tioga County election officials received death threats, which, to be clear, wasn't anything new for the election officials in Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, the Republican City Commissioner Al Schmidt has been former now, he just stepped down a couple weeks ago, but he's been an outspoken advocate, you know, pushing for there to be a media response to this, you know, increase in threats to our election officials, and that those threats are also on a bipartisan basis. These are made against Republican and Democrat election officials by people that are unhappy with the results of the election, and you know, being stoked by these efforts to pursue these partisan election reviews. So currently, and again, this was not unexpected, the state legislature's effort to subpoena and obtain personal identifying information of all voters in Pennsylvania is you know, consumed in litigation. which is not free. And again, it's not just a financial matter, it's a matter of time and a distraction for these officials that should be right now preparing for a safe and secure 2022 election. So we go to the next slide. So kind of where does Pennsylvania fit? I think, there's some good news, but definitely reason to have concerns. So according to the Muhlenberg College survey, which just came out last month, 6 out of 10 Pennsylvanians who voted in last year's election are confident the election was conducted fairly. That's, very happy that there's 6 out of 10, but I have concerns about, what about the 4 out of 10 that didn't respond, that they are confident that this election was conducted fairly. A strong majority of Pennsylvania voters disagree with the claim that the Pennsylvania state legislature should be able to overturn the results of an election after the results have been certified. This is not just an idle question. We have seen bills in other states which would have provided the state legislature with the authority to overturn election results and basically pick and choose winners of an election. This is a very scary, outrageous, I think, suggestion that would allow state legislatures to just pick winners. And I think, it's appropriate for a strong majority of Pennsylvanians to agree that that's a concern. And also, no surprise, right? Like the Pennsylvania county election officials are more trusted to provide safe and secure and accurate elections in the state's legislative, executive, and judicial institutions. So I will just quickly talk about a couple of things that are going to be further discussed in the 2022 legislative session, and then I'm going to hand it over to Susan, who can provide many more details about both these and much more about what's going on. But redistricting is an important issue right now. As you likely know, Pennsylvania lost 1 congressional district due to the census this year. So they are now in the middle of redrawing the various districts. There's 2 different processes in Pennsylvania. One process where the state legislature is responsible for drawing the congressional maps, and there's a separate committee that's responsible for drawing the state legislative maps. Not super surprising, there is not agreement between the governor's office and the state legislature about what the map should look like, and that it appears, based on what I was just reading right before this call, that is going, this issue about the maps is going to the state Supreme Court. Election bills, there have been multiple election administration bills, as Jabari mentioned, that have been written in an effort to make it more difficult for eligible Pennsylvanians to vote. I've included information about just a couple of them. Obviously, some of the more outrageous ones would reduce or eliminate vote by mail. Again, which we just think is bad policy for so many reasons. But again, so happy to be here, and I'm so appreciative of your time and interest in this matter.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much. It's great to hear that bit of bright news about the Muhlenberg survey showing that a majority of Pennsylvanians believe that the last election was conducted fairly. So, we often hear about some of the bad things in Pennsylvania. So that's a good little glimmer of hope there. And I'll turn it over to Susan. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Gobreski. I serve a couple of roles. I am on the state board of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, and I lead our work on voting, elections, redistricting. I serve as a senior advisor to Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, and lead the democracy work there. The first job is a volunteer. The other one is part of the work that I do. So I spend a lot of time talking about these issues. Liz gave it a great overview. So I'm just going to do a couple of things. One is actually there was just in the past hour, a court decision came from the Supreme Court that they are actually taking up the redistricting issue. And so the Supreme Court will be working on resolving the issue of a litigated constitutional map. On Friday, our state legislative redistricting commission, or the reapportion commission, will be voting maps and making decisions about what the state maps look like. And then there'll be a 30-day period where people can petition or litigate whether or not those maps are adequate, and then they'll get decided. That likely means that the petition period will get pushed back, but the courts have to confirm that. However, the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, the LRC, actually did come up with some maps that significantly moved us away from really several decades of deeply entrenched gerrymandering, and did a much better job than the legislature has previously done at updating maps based on some of the population shifting. People in Pennsylvania have basically moved from west to east, so we should see a commensurate change in moving of districts from west to east. And our expectation is that the new maps will be much better because they will much more reflect where people live, and the way that people distribute themselves in the Commonwealth. So that's a quick update on redistricting, although there's certainly room for questions. On the legislation, there's a couple of key issues. There is a bad proposal that's been sitting out there called House Bill 1800 that we continue to oppose. It had provisions that would help reduce drop boxes, place more restrictions on how people can cast mail ballots, change the satellite locations, increase the period under which the closed window when people can't register. Part of what Act 77 did was change it so that the people could register up to 15 days or 14 days before an election. And it had been 30 days, which is one of the strictest and the longest deadlines in the country. And so we will continue to oppose that. The other big trend in Pennsylvania right now is legislating by constitutional amendment. Our legislature, because we have a system of checks and balances where the legislature has to pass a law and the governor has to sign it, and we have a split control. Some of the legislation that has been proposed hasn't been signed by the governor, but proposals for constitutional amendments don't need to get signed by the governor. So then they have to get passed exactly the same way in two separate sessions. And then they go to voters. But voters in Pennsylvania don't tend to say no to those things. And there are now a lot. There is the Senate Intergovernmental Operations Committee has actually subpoenaed a great deal of private voter information. Jabari mentioned this, and Jabari touched on a point that I think is really important here. They weren't just looking for patterns. First of all, the Intergovernmental Operations Committee is not the committee that usually deals with elections, so that was strange. Second, they said that they needed this voter information, and not just the general voter file information, but private voter data, including driver's license numbers and parts of your social security number. What that really means is that they weren't looking for patterns. They were looking for to investigate individual voters, which we would see as a huge problem. However, there's actually an entrepreneurial journalist, did some great reporting and did an analysis on the voter file, and took a look and actually looked to see if there were irregularities, and he really didn't find many. And what he did find was explainable. I'm actually, if it's okay, I'm going to just put in the chat. He's actually doing a presentation tomorrow night, and I would encourage folks to come to that. He's going to provide an overview of what he found when he did an analysis of the publicly available information, which is what should have happened. The other thing that's happening, and you know, the big concern here, I think the theme here is that when we have problems where people don't have access to government, when we have things where you're placing more restrictions on who can participate, when you're making it harder for people to vote, when you're putting more barriers between people and the decision makers, that has a ripple effect across our community. It isn't just about democracy or just deciding elections. It is also about how we operate, right? How we make decisions about roads and about taxes and about businesses and about families and about schools and all of the things that people want to have succeed in their communities. So we think this is really important, that democracy is important to business. And so one of the other things that's happening in the category of like things happening in the shadows that aren't actually, that are legal but not okay, the legislature, each caucus, then that's a party issue. So this isn't the political party, this is a legislative caucus. So either the GOP or the Democratic caucus actually have budgets. So those are taxpayer funded budgets. And so this isn't just the committees or the majority committee and the minority committee, it's their own caucus, hired the vendor that would actually do the analysis of the voter file and the rest of the investigation around the election. So this is the Senate Intergovernmental Operations Committee hired a vendor named Envoy Sage, which does not have a track record. And the contract was with the GOP caucus. And this isn't a partisan, this is I'm stating facts. This isn't an opinion here. And so there are a lot of questions about what does that mean if the contract was with the caucus and not with the committee itself. So we continue to want, a couple of positive things that are coming up. There is a potential gift ban and campaign finance proposals that we could be dealing with. So what we want to start doing, and those are really important also for like small businesses who don't necessarily have the kind of money to put on the table to hire well-paid lobbyists to do the whining and dining. So part of what we want to do is make sure that our elections, the opportunity to vote, the opportunity to influence legislators and campaigns and election outcomes and districts are all freely and fairly accessible to all. That's especially important to small businesses, but it's important to all of us. I'm happy to answer questions, and Liz did a great job, and so did Jabari, talking about these issues. So I'll stop, but I know we'll have questions at the end, and I'll also share a couple of other things. But I definitely encourage you to come hear from this reporter. I'm very excited about it.
Thank you so much, Susan. We did have one question asking who that vendor was. I believe it was Envoy Sage was the name of the company that the GOP caucus is contracting with. Susan, I guess I did have one follow-up question that might be of concern to businesses is, with the current the audit, the quote audit of personal identifiable information through the election voter rolls, would the legislators in theory be able to look up individual business owners, see how they voted? Is that something that they're considering?
So they still can't see how somebody voted. Okay. Right.
Okay.
Like that's we'll still have that. You can make speculations, you can draw conclusions. The question then becomes though, are they starting, we don't know why. They've never said why they want the driver's license and social security information. There are also other questions around, since I know folks here are concerned about expenses, one of the other questions is it's very expensive to have your identity stolen. And it's not at all clear that there are enough security measures in place or controls on how the data would be handled. And so when the state does something, when the State Department of State does something, they have a procurement process that has a lot of controls and restrictions on it to help protect individual data. Some of members of the legislature have said some of those things would be in place, but there's nothing guaranteeing that in the contract. There's nothing guaranteeing that. So, do you really want a committee to have a bunch of voter information without the kind of assurances that you would normally expect around how private information that you give to the government to confirm your identity is being handled?
Thank you. And we are now moving on to Ethan. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means as a small business owner. So we're an education publishing company here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We have about 63 employees all over the country, but most of them are here in central Pennsylvania. And if you had asked me 10 years ago if I would be on a panel or listening to panel talking about should businesses care about democracy, I would have laughed at you. I would have thought, oh, maybe if I was, I do some business in a couple other countries, I was like, all right, maybe talking about the context of South Africa or dealing with a business in Russia, where there's questions about copyright and rule of law and whether my product can actually get shipped there. But the honest response to this webinar is we should not even be having this webinar. The only reason we're having this webinar is because democracy right now in America and in Pennsylvania is under attack. And it feels weird to say this. I was on a call earlier today and I was talking to someone. I said, oh, that elected official, I consider them in the pro-democracy caucus, which is a small group of their party that is still for democracy. And the fact that we actually use words out loud like, oh, this candidate is pro-democracy as a way to differentiate them is frankly shocking. So that's sort of the big picture. Is the fact that we're even having this conversation should be a wake-up call to a lot of business owners, because historically most small business owners like myself, who may be slightly politically engaged, would, we'd meet with our local state rep or state senator. We invite them to our business for a ribbon cutting or a product launch. We donate to them so that, they'll answer our phone call when we're trying to navigate red tape in Harrisburg. And then if your business is doing a lot of business with the government or heavily regulated, or you just really like politics, you're engaged in direct lobbying. You're donating to more candidates. You're working with your business association to pass legislation that benefits you. And that's what we've sort of, in the business community, have come to realize that's sort of normal. But we're entering a new era where people are starting to question this, because, and the reason why democracy really matters for business is we want stability. We want a set of rules that everyone can follow. When we have disagreements, we want to be able to go to a judge and know that the judge is fair, and we're all playing by a common set of rules. And we want to make products and sell them to our customers and make sure that the money is sound, and we want stability. That's what business really wants. We want free markets. We want a rule of law. But as we see our democracy under attack and also dropping, if you look at the democracy index, America is now down to 25th place in the world. We're now what is called a flawed democracy. So we're right up there with Portugal. There's Latin American countries that are much better off from a democracy standpoint than the United States is right now. And I think a lot of folks don't realize that. And we're seeing the difficulty with this. And at the state level, Jabari did a great job talking about how much time is wasted in Harrisburg that could be spent solving problems for business when people are talking about these audits and changing the way people vote. But we're also moving into that dangerous place. Susan and Elizabeth talked about the redistricting efforts. One of the key pieces in that redistricting was Mark Nordenberg, who's professor at the University of Pittsburgh, was that well-respected, trusted nonprofit leader who's been a professor, well-respected by both sides, has donated to Republicans and Democrats in his past, was called upon to serve his community, and he did so to chair that redistricting commission. And as a result of him taking his time out of his busy schedule to do that, he's now getting attacked. I mean, we have party officials and elected officials calling for reduction of funding for the University of Pittsburgh because they don't like how someone who is volunteering made a decision. I've had personal conversations with business leaders in Lancaster, nonprofit leaders who have told me they're scared to take a stand because they know that there will be retribution from whether it's a congressman or a state rep or a senator if they take a strong stand. So we're at that point where people are actually scared to volunteer for these needed positions to do the good work of governing, but people are scared because they know there's a good chance there's going to be retribution. But I think the key piece is to get more businesses to stand up and say, we can disagree about tax policy, we can disagree about regulatory policy, but we should all come together and support good government, democratic norms. And the trust factor is another big piece. When you look at who people don't trust their local politician, but they do trust local businesses. And the more local that business, the more that trust is there. So when CEOs, when business managers start to stand up and say things, whether it's to the community through op-eds or just to your own employees, that your employees will trust you much more than they'll trust some big organization, some national organization, or some politician. So, and also, if you're just looking at your bottom line, your employee engagement goes up. So there's a couple stats I want to share with you from the Global Strategy Group survey. 76% of people are more likely to work for a company that promotes democracy. 81% are more likely to buy that company's products or services, and 81% are more likely to recommend that company to their friends and family. So people recognize that business just wants a fair playing field, and they want the system to work. And so that employee engagement is pretty key. And I just want to share a couple of our sort of best practices that we've done at our relatively small company that has encouraged that. And I sort of do 4 things that we've done that have been successful. So we stay nonpartisan. People can look me up on the internet and know exactly who I supported in each election. I'm not shy about who I support. But one of the things we do is we offer paid time off for, we call it do good time, but we're explicit in there that it can be used for political activity. You can volunteer for a candidate, you can volunteer to be a judge of elections, and you get 2 paid days off a year to use however you want. So you can work inside or outside of the polls all day long. And then we also do, both for the primary and the general election, we send out regular email reminders when we have company meetings. We let people know when election day is. Here's the information about how you could do absentee mail-in voting, depending on what the rules are at the time. Registration information. I've had new employees who then say after a meeting, I'm not even registered to vote. So I hand them a registration card, or I link to, Vote PA's website. I send them information how to find their polling place. And the big thing with when you're talking about encouraging your employees to vote is not just say, here's the information, but ask them to make a plan to vote. Not just, hey, go vote, it's make a plan to vote. And then week of an election, we also send out another email. And what I like to do is I assemble every voter guide I can find, whether it's League of Women Voters, whether it's the Progressive Voter Guide, or it's the Pennsylvania Family Institute Voter Guide. Every single one I can find from every partisan angle. And I just make a full list of every voter guide and I send it to my employees. If someone hands one to me, I'll put it in the break room and set it down. So it's, here's information on how you can be educated. Here's how you can vote. And then election day, we send another email out and say, here's when the polls open. Here's when they close. If you haven't voted already, take some time to vote. And then I also remind people, if you're in line to vote, stay in line. If you're going to be late to work, but you're in line to vote, stay in line. And it's one of, I've yet to have any employee actually call and say, I'm going to be late. But just them knowing that we value this as a part of their civic engagement does a lot for our employee engagement. So that's just some of the practical tips that we do. But at the end of the day, we want our employees to be engaged and we want them to vote. And I could say, I haven't looked at our numbers recently, but I would venture to guess our employees vote at a higher rate than sort of your average Pennsylvanian votes. So those are some of the things, but more businesses need to stand up and both start talking to their employees and then talking in their local community and saying democracy matters and we need to get involved because we're treading in dangerous territory.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ethan. We had one quick follow-up question from one of the attendees. What was the source for the statistic you provided on employees' attitudes toward their employers?
It is Global Strategy Group did a survey. I can drop a link into the chat as well of that. It's from a Democracy Works blog.
Great. Thank you so much. At this time, does anyone have any questions? This is the question and answer period. There was a, okay. Well, I had one real quick for Ethan, but also for anyone who wants to weigh in. Ethan, how would you encourage a business owner or anyone really who is skeptical of getting involved in good, pro-democracy work, who might be worried about being perceived as political? How would you kind of encourage them to do that work?
I think the biggest one is just being upfront and saying we're not going to be partisan. And then there's plenty of organizations out there. You can do some Google searches that have like we have democracyisgoodforbusiness.com. You've got Business for America. So sending resource links to outside trusted third parties is another good way to do it. So it's less the last thing your employees want is an email from you that's essentially an email forward with your opinion on the local state of politics. What they want is, here's trusted information. So the more you can link to, here's the state government's information on how to register to vote. So appealing to those third-party institutions, but then saying what we value is you participating as an informed voter. So we're going to do what we can to make sure you're an informed voter and have the ability to vote.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Do any of our panelists have any closing remarks or? All right, well.
I'll make one quick comment, which is that for those of you who are concerned about vote by mail, I think that it's really important that people do a couple of things. One, speak up, tell your elected officials, post on social media that you think it's important to vote by mail, and that you think it's important to protect the right, even if you like walking in the polls. And I actually do. I've been a huge champion for vote by mail, and I still like to walk into the polls. It's something I enjoy and pride myself on. My husband likes to vote by mail, and my mom needs to vote by mail. So I think there are a couple of things that are really important here. One thing to remember is that we have to apply to vote by mail every year. They say it's permanent, but it's actually permanent for this year. So I would go ahead and encourage you to do it. I would encourage you to encourage your employees and your social and business circles to remind people that it is vote by mail is still legal in Pennsylvania, and everyone should be able to take advantage of it, which also shows the consumer demand. That's another principle here that I think we understand. So I think that that's a really good thing, and don't be afraid to speak up and call your legislator and let them know that you support vote by mail. And so I think that we can keep talking about this, but one of the other business principles, as I understand it, is these issues around consumer demand, consumer confidence, consumer convenience. And part of what every decision we make should be about is whether or not we are encouraging and making it easier and more convenient for every qualified elector or every eligible voter is another regular person way to say that. Every person who's eligible should be able to vote at a time that's convenient for them. I was in Oregon when one of these policy issues was introduced, visiting someone, and they get a mail guide and their ballot mailed to them weeks ahead. So they really have time to sit and think about it. That is how everyone in Oregon votes. They were shocked when I was talking to them about our system. So, we need to show people that we want the convenience, we want the safety and security of options. We want it to be close to home, drop boxes, satellite election offices, so that we're not, it's not a choice about whether you happen to live near the county seat. So, and making sure that our legislators understand that we expect modern and convenient voting options that are absolutely secure. But all the evidence shows that our elections were well run, well administered by local officials. So I think that's the thing I would add. Doug, thanks for that opening.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you to all of Business for America, Doug, Jabari, Sarah, Rich, and Chip, everyone. Thank you for putting this together. I really appreciate it. And I actually learned some things from Ethan as well. Lizzie and I have learned from each other, but we talked before. So
thank you. There was one question that I think was pointed towards Ethan, but I think anyone might be able to weigh in. It was how, as a business leader, how would you, if you're concerned about the cost of giving employees time off to vote, how do you handle that? I know Sarah Bonk, our CEO, she posted a link to a guide, maketimetavote.org, that has information and resources for business leaders on that topic, but I'm curious if anyone has any quick feedback. We have a couple minutes.
I mean, the big one is it drives employee engagement. I mean, we've made an effort over the last couple of years and have been successful in that we've now been on the best places to work in central Pennsylvania for the last several years. Because we know that an engaged employee is a much more productive one who's willing to do that extra stuff. So if we're willing to go above and beyond to help them participate in democracy, then we know that they're more likely to go above and beyond and help us in our companies. So it's one of, you have to trust people at the end of the day. to use their time wisely. And I've never regretted trusting my employees too much.
That's a great point. Great point to end on. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you to our panelists for really great remarks and good conversation. Thank you everybody for attending. Again, we have the link to our letter. If you would like to sign that, we encourage you to reach out to me, doug@bfa.us. If you have any questions, I'm happy to chat. And we look forward to hosting future webinars on this and other topics. Thank you so much, everybody.